People often talk about the BSDs and Linux in the same conversation, and it makes sense why. They are both Unix-like operating systems. Now, I know what someone's gonna say. Actually, Linux isn't an operating system, it's a kernel. You know what I'm talking about, I know what I'm talking about, this conversation gets us nowhere. With this being the case, it is very easy to forget that these projects actually stem from very different cultural backgrounds, but more importantly, very different schools of software licensing. Linux is known for having the GPL v2, but when the project first started, it had what can only be described as an utterly horrendous license. It wasn't in its own license document. It looked like this. This was very quickly replaced because, well, Torvalds shouldn't be writing his own license, and it was kind of just thrown together because it didn't have anything to begin with. Full source must be available and free, if not with the distribution, then at least on asking for it. Copyright notices must be intact. In fact, if you distribute only parts of it, you may have to add copyrights as there aren't Cs in all the files. Small partial excerpts may be copied without bothering with copyrights. You may not distribute this for a fee, not even handling costs. There is a lot of ways this can be exploited. Also, the idea of selling a distro would not have even been possible like this. So, this got replaced, as should be obvious by actually going with GPL v2 after this, and also the fact that in Torvald's original email about Linux, he said he's not doing something big and professional like GNU. There was obviously a lot of sort of inspiration from what GNU was doing, the Free Software Foundation. There was a lot of doing stuff in that same kind of way that they've been doing things. Over the years, Torvalds has spoken quite a number of times on the GPL, most notably in Linus Torvalds says GPL v3 violates everything that GPL v2 stood for, where he explains why he goes with the v2 version, what he doesn't like about v3, and what his goals are around the source code of the kernel. Basically saying the relationship he's looking for is, I make the source code, I give you the source code, you use the source code, you modify the source code, you give the modifications back. That is the end of the transaction. He doesn't like the additional restrictions that are added with GPL v3. But when we move over to the BSD world, things are quite a bit different. No longer is GNU our foundation. This can be traced all the way back to Berkeley Unix, or the Berkeley Software Distribution, BSD, back in 1974. By 1989, we had the original BSD license, nowadays going by the phrase 4-clause BSD. The reason it's 4-clause is you might know the 3-clause BSD license, or the 2-clause BSD license, or BSD 0, the 0-clause BSD license. These are modified versions of that original license, but the original license is a really basic license compared especially to things like the GPL. Firstly, we have a copyright notice. Redistribution and use in source and binary forms with or without modification are permitted provided the following conditions are met. Redistribution of source code must retain the above copyright notice, this list of conditions, and the following disclaimer. Redistributions in binary form must reproduce the above copyright notice, the list of conditions, and the following disclaimer in the documentation and or other materials provided with the distribution. All advertised materials mentioning features or use of this software must display the following acknowledgement. This product includes software developed by the copyright holder. Neither the name of the copyright holder nor the names of its contributors may be used to endorse or promote products derived from this software without specific prior written permission. And then this is provided without warranty and all that good stuff that you see in many, many other licenses today. This idea that you must share the source code, this idea that things must be done in an open source way, it's definitely encouraged in the BSD world, but unlike with the GPL, it's not a foundational principle of the way the license was written as the way that things have been done since the very, very start of the project. By 1992, we saw a project known as 386BSD, and this is what most of the modern BSD we have today stemmed off of. Things like FreeBSD, OpenBSD, NetBSD, all started with this project. I wouldn't say these movements, these approaches are diametrically opposed to each other. BSD code is totally compatible with a GPL project. It's not the case the other way around. There are things you can do, but It's not as simple as just taking the code and putting it in the project. And just about a week ago, we saw this change in FreeBSD. Retire dialog. This is a specific software component. This is the last remaining piece of GPL software in the base system. The installer transitioned to BSD dialog 4 years ago, and the last remaining dialog consumer, DPV, was turned off more than 2 years ago. Retire DPV, libdpv, libfigpar, used only by DPV, and dialog itself. And with that, this has been a very, very long work in progress. They can retire the entire GNU subtree. With GNU diff and C dialog gone, this is now an empty shell, no longer in the base FreeBSD system. Do they have any GNU code left? Now you might be thinking, wait, FreeBSD had GNU code? That doesn't even make sense to begin with. When I say this has been a long work in progress, let's go back in time a little bit. This is before the Git repo existed. So this is from their SVN. 33 years ago, they had GNU components in FreeBSD. Something they wouldn't even remotely consider now. They actually had GNU chess in FreeBSD. I don't know why they did that. I don't know what reason there was, but that was there. However, you also had more sensible things. If we go to user.bin, there's a bunch of these core utils components. There's awk, there's diff, there's grep, there's, what else? Man and patch and various other things. If you go to the library, you have libmalloc and various other things in here. All components which over the years have since been replaced. And that now allows them to mark this page as complete. GPL software in FreeBSD base. After this commit here, FreeBSD's userland is free of any GPL code in its base system. None of this is to say the Linux approach is worse, the BSD approach is better, that Linux should do everything in the way that BSD does it, have everything permissively licensed. But I've seen a lot of anger from people about FreeBSD doing this, FreeBSD having this as their goal, as if this isn't the way that FreeBSD has been literally the entire time it existed, and BSD in general, most of the time it has just existed as a concept. The idea that the BSDs like permissively licensed things, that shouldn't be news to anyone. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the BSDs and understand why they have this approach. Here we have the FreeBSD book. Let's go to the section on goals. FreeBSD project goals. The goals of the FreeBSD project are to provide software that may be used for any purpose and without strings attached. Many of us have a significant investment in the code and project and would certainly not mind a little financial compensation now and then. But we are definitely not prepared to insist on it. We believe that our first and foremost mission is to provide code to any and all comers, and for whatever purpose, so the code gets the widest possible use and provides the widest possible benefit. This is, we believe, one of the most fundamental goals of free software, and one that we enthusiastically support. That code now source to which falls under the GNU General Public License GPL, or Library General Public License LGPL, comes with slightly more strings attached, though at least on the side of enforced access rather than the usual opposite. Due to the additional complexities that can evolve in the commercial use of GPL software, we do, however, prefer software submitted under the more relaxed BSD license when it is a reasonable option to do so. Now let's go to the why you should use FreeBSD page under the section on permissive licensing. FreeBSD's permissive license, the BSD license, starkly contrasts the more restrictive General Public License GPL used by Linux. This license grants users exceptional freedom. It allows unrestricted use of FreeBSD, including commercial applications, without licensing fees or royalties. Furthermore, users are free to modify the source code to suit their specific needs, and they are not required to disclose those changes if they choose to distribute the modified software. This flexibility makes FreeBSD an attractive choice for businesses and developers who require a customizable and cost-effective foundation for their projects. Companies can leverage FreeBSD stability and performance for their infrastructure without the constraints of the GPL, and developers can freely modify the code to create custom solutions without worrying about licensing limitations. Now I know as soon as I say this, someone is going to say, oh, but what about Linux? And yes, Linux, fair, that's just one of the exceptions though. A lot of companies try to avoid dealing with GPL code. It is a bit of a legal challenge, and this is a core function of the GPL. It is a core function that if you're going to work with GPL software, if you're going to work with GPL code and make modifications to it, they want you to share the source code. That is like the point of the GPL. But when you want to have something where you just can take it proprietary, when you don't have to share it, that is something which FreeBSD isn't opposed to, and that's the core function of what the BSD license provides. You don't have to like that, and I wouldn't like if Linux was licensed like that. At the same time, though, I'm not opposed to someone who wants to go and do that with their own project, and that is sort of the foundation of BSD. Over on OpenBSD, they have also commented on this in the OpenBSD copyright policy, in the section on the GNU General Public License, GPL, LGPL, copyleft, etc. Yeah, that's how you say that. The GNU Public License and licenses modeled on it impose the restriction that source code must be distributed or made available for all works that are derivative of the GNU copyrighted code, technically only to users, consumers, purchasers of that code, of that software, not to just general people, but a lot of people they just open source it because it's just easier. While this may superficially look like a noble strategy, it is a condition that is typically unacceptable for commercial use of software, so in practice, it usually ends up hindering free sharing and reuse of code and ideas rather than encouraging it. As a consequence, no additional software bound by the GPL terms will be considered for inclusion into the OpenBSD base system. For historical reasons, the OpenBSD base system still includes the following GPL license components: the GNU Compiler Collection, GCC, with supporting bin utils and libraries, GNU CVS, GNU TextInfo, the MK Hybrid File System Creation Tool, and the readline library. Replacement by equivalent, more freely licensed tools is a long-time desideratum? Desideratum. I have literally never seen this word in my entire life. Something that is needed, wanted, or considered essential for a particular purpose. Plan. From a GPL, from a Linux perspective, your first thought might be, this just allows companies to take your project and never give anything back. Yes, it actually does. And this is well known that companies like Apple pull in portions of FreeBSD and OpenBSD for use on macOS, for use on iOS. They're not directly based on these projects, unlike some people seem to think, but they do make use of some of the userland tooling and various other components. Over with the PlayStation, Sony for quite a while now has been basing their operating system off of FreeBSD. It's not entirely clear with Nintendo, but it seems to be the case that they've been doing the same thing as well. Now, with Nintendo, they do seem to make some use of Android components as well, but it's not entirely clear. Now, of course, when we're talking about Microsoft, Xbox uses a Windows fork. Who would be surprised about that? And these companies, for the most part, don't contribute back to the project. Maybe a couple of little things here and there, but it's not a core focus of what they do. They don't just go and open source their operating systems and just put the code out there, try to upstream everything, and make the mainline project even better. From a Linux perspective, this is just immediately considered to be a bad thing. From a BSD perspective, though, well, that's the function of the license. As I said before, we believe that our first and foremost mission is to provide code to any and all comers and for whatever purpose, so that the code gets the widest possible use and provides the widest possible benefit. This is, we believe, one of the most fundamental goals of free software and one that we enthusiastically support. The goal is to get as many people using that code as possible, not necessarily to make the FreeBSD project or the OpenBSD project or any of these other individual BSD projects the best thing they can possibly be. Now, of course, they would love to have a giant sponsorship from Apple or Sony or Nintendo or any of these companies. That would be great. But it's also not the point. The point is the code. Someone might reasonably say, oh, well, users are just going to install GPL software onto their system anyway. Why does any of this matter? And that's totally fair. But it's also totally fine. It is not the concern of the BSDs if you want to install GPL code. They have GPL software in their repos. You can install that onto your system. Bash is still a very popular shell in the BSD world. In the same vein, even though Fedora really cares about free software, it's not really their concern if you want to go and install Steam, for example. Steam is proprietary. Everything on Steam, for the most part, is proprietary. But that's not really relevant to the distro. What matters, the entire discussion that is being had here, is about what is in the base system, what is required to have FreeBSD actually function. And their goal was no GPL required in the base system, no GPL that makes FreeBSD work. I think a lot of people forget why we say the term permissive license. If those licenses are permissive, what does that make the GPL? The point of the GPL, and maybe it's not a nice way to phrase it, but the core point of the GPL is to be a restrictive free software license, a restrictive open source license, as a way to protect the four freedoms: the freedom to run, the freedom to study, the freedom to redistribute, and the freedom to modify. You protect those freedoms by restricting the freedoms of other people that want to take yours away. This is why you'll never hear discussions by free software people about the freedom to run proprietary software. Even though that is really important to the user, it's diametrically opposed to what the FSF wants. No one's going to stop you. It's your PC. But it's outside the purview of the free software philosophy. The philosophy is built around the four freedoms. Yeah, you can run proprietary software, but that's not the kind of freedom that is being discussed here. The freedom is the freedom to take software, to take the source code, to modify it, to share it around, and for no one to be able to stop you doing so. One thing you might be wondering is, why did FreeBSD have any GPL code to begin with? It's a BSD licensed project, it's permissively licensed. Why did they even remotely try to bring that in? Well, it's simply due to the fact that Linux is more popular. The BSD world had this chance to become incredibly big, and it is big in the proprietary space, but big in the sort of open source developer space. But there was a lawsuit in the BSD world where a subsidiary of AT&T was basically trying to argue that BSD infringed on their patents and it wasn't allowed to exist, and they had to pay all of these fees and all this nonsense. And by the time that any of that actually got ironed out, Linux had already come along. It had built up some momentum. Then we had projects like FreeBSD come along, but FreeBSD was already a year late, and then OpenBSD was a couple of years after that, and by that point, there was no stopping Linux. At that time, Linux just had the momentum, and people on Linux were doing things with GPL. So if you wanted the things that you wanted, unless you were going to build them yourself, which is something they did slowly over time, you basically just had to accept it. So I wish the BSD people the best of luck, enjoy your endeavors, and congratulations, you now have a system that has no more GPL code. Hopefully that goes well for you. I know, I'm a Linux person. Oh my god, GPL and all that. If you want to do your own thing, I'm happy for you to do your own thing. I like Linux being the way I like Linux. You like BSD being the way you like BSD. We can both do our thing. Anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video. Subscribe as well. Hype button, that's a cool thing on mobile. And let me know your thoughts down below. If you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Silly Bear Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and big software distro. No, that's not a good one. Let me know in the comments. Oh, I know. Big sexy distro. We'll go with that one.